What happens when the most disciplined army of the ancient world collides with the unstoppable firepower of modern warfare? Imagine standing on a battlefield where the air smells of iron and dust, where rows of Roman legionaries lock their shields into an impenetrable wall, and on the other side state-of-the-art rifles, armor-piercing rounds, and weapons that can shatter steel at 1,000 yards. It's a clash of centuries that were never meant to meet. On one side, the scutum, a curved Roman shield designed to absorb and deflect brutal blows. On the other, modern firearms capable of tearing through concrete. The question is simple but terrifying. Could Roman shields, perfected over hundreds of years, withstand the weapons of our age? Today we're not just talking about history, we're bending time itself to find out. If you love history with a twist of what if, you're in the right place. Hit that like button, subscribe for more cinematic deep dives, and share this with someone who geeks out over ancient battles. And hey, stick around, because by the end of this you'll see Roman shields in a way you've never imagined before. Picture the Roman battlefield 2,000 years ago. Dust rising, sun beating down, the sound of sandals pounding against the earth. And among all the chaos, one thing stands out more than the swords, the spears, or even the soldiers themselves: the shield. The scutum wasn't just a piece of wood strapped to the arm. For Rome, it was identity, strategy, and survival wrapped into one curved wall. So what made this shield so extraordinary? At first glance, the scutum seems simple. A tall, rectangular curve, about 3.5 feet long and 2.5 feet wide, with a slight bend inward. It was usually made of layers of wood glued together, reinforced with canvas or leather, and then rimmed with iron or bronze. At its heart sat a rounded boss of metal, the umbo, sticking out like a clenched fist, ready to punch back at the enemy. But the scutum wasn't just designed to stop an attack. It was designed to control the battlefield. Think about it. Most shields of the ancient world were round. Greek hoplites carried heavy bronze aspis shields. Celtic warriors favored wide, flat ovals. Yet Rome chose something different, a rectangular curve that hugged the soldier's body. Why? Because Roman warfare wasn't about individual heroics. It was about the unit. One man's shield was never just his own. When legionaries stood shoulder to shoulder, the edges of their scuta overlapped, creating a seamless wall. One body of men became one single moving fortress. And here's the genius: that curved shape mattered. Instead of a flat board that could splinter under pressure, the curve distributed force across its surface. Imagine a modern car hood, curved to resist dense and spread impact. The scutum worked the same way. A barbarian sword or a Celtic spear might crash against it, but instead of shattering, the energy dispersed. The soldier absorbed less of the blow, and the shield survived longer in combat. Of course, it wasn't indestructible. A powerful enough strike, a well-aimed arrow, or repeated blows could break it. But remember, Rome didn't expect the shield to last forever. They expected it to last long enough. Long enough to push forward, to absorb a volley of arrows, to create openings for the man beside you. It was disposable, but in the hands of a disciplined army, disposable didn't mean weak. It meant efficient. Now, think about what that shield represented to the soldier himself. For a legionary, the scutum was more than wood and leather. It was home. It was protection. It was even a weapon. That iron boss in the middle wasn't just decorative. It could be slammed into an opponent's face, ribs, or shield edge, stunning them long enough for the gladius to strike. In training, Roman soldiers practiced not just blocking but striking with their scuta. The shield wasn't passive. It was aggressive. And let's not forget the visuals. Many scuta were painted with bold colors and symbols: lightning bolts, eagles, wings of victory. Imagine standing in formation and looking left and right, seeing not just wood, but a sea of painted shields glowing in the sun. It wasn't just protection, it was intimidation. To the enemy, it was like watching a wall of gods descending on you. But what about durability? Could a shield like this stand up to real punishment? Ancient accounts suggest it could. Roman historians wrote of shields catching volleys of arrows and still being usable. Archaeological finds, though rare, show evidence of shields patched, reinforced, and repainted after multiple campaigns. These weren't fragile props. They were field-tested equipment built to endure the grind of war. Still, let's be honest, these were shields of their time. They were meant to stop arrows, spears, sling stones, maybe the edge of an iron sword. They were not built with the idea of stopping bullets. The toughest scutum in history, even with its iron boss and reinforced rim, was never designed to withstand the kinetic energy of a modern rifle round traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. That's like comparing a medieval castle wall to a modern missile strike. The scale of destruction is worlds apart. And yet, here's where it gets fascinating. The Romans didn't just rely on material strength, they relied on tactics. A single scutum might not stop everything. But hundreds of them, locked together, angled just right, could turn an open battlefield into a fortress. This was the Roman genius. Not perfection in a single object, but perfection in how thousands of objects worked together. In fact, the scutum's true strength wasn't in how much it could absorb, but in how it allowed soldiers to fight as a unit. With a shield this size, a legionary didn't need to expose himself. He could crouch behind it, thrust his short gladius out from the side and retreat back into safety. Every movement was calculated, controlled, efficient. The shield was the anchor of Roman warfare, everything else revolved around it. To truly understand the scutum's importance, you have to imagine being on the other side. You're a warrior from Gaul, standing on the field with your long sword, facing this wall of red and gold. You swing at the nearest soldier, but his shield absorbs the blow. Before you can pull back, another shield smashes into you, knocking you off balance. A short sword flashes from behind the wall, stabbing quick and low. You stumble. The wall doesn't stop. It moves forward, step by step, shield by shield, until you're crushed beneath it. That's the nightmare the scutum created. Not just protection but inevitability. So when we ask the question, could a Roman shield stop modern weapons? We have to start by appreciating what the scutum really was. It wasn't just a shield. It was the beating heart of Roman warfare, a piece of military technology so effective that it helped carve an empire across 3 continents. And yet, the scutum's greatness was tied to its time. Against spears it was a fortress. Against arrows it was a roof. Against swords it was a wall. But against a bullet? Against a weapon that travels faster than sound? That's where things get interesting. Because soon we're going to put it to the test, to see what happens when the shield that conquered the ancient world meets the firepower of today. A shield by itself is protection. But in the hands of the Roman legions, it became something far greater, a building block in a living machine. The genius of Rome was never just in weapons but in discipline. The scutum wasn't designed for individual duels, like a knight's shield in the Middle Ages. It was designed to be part of a system where every soldier's survival depended on the man to his left and right. Imagine standing in the ranks of a Roman legion. You grip your scutum in your left hand, your gladius in your right. You're shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of men, your shields overlapping like scales on a giant iron beast. To your enemy you are no longer thousands of individuals. You're a wall. A fortress with legs. This is where the scutum's true power revealed itself. The shield wall. The simplest formation was the murum, the wall. Legionaries lined up, shields locked together in front. To an attacker it looked impenetrable. Arrows and spears would rattle against the wood and iron, but the wall held. And when the order came, the wall didn't just defend, it advanced. Slowly, step by step, the Roman wall pushed forward, driving enemies back until their lines broke. But the Romans didn't stop there. The testudo, the tortoise. Perhaps the most iconic Roman formation was the testudo, Latin for tortoise. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Soldiers in front held their scuta forward, while those behind raised theirs overhead. The result was a moving box, protected on all sides, top and front. Now picture yourself as an enemy archer. You release a volley of arrows, expecting screams and chaos. Instead, your arrows bounce harmlessly off a shell of shields. The tortoise keeps moving, step after step, silent and unstoppable. It was psychological warfare as much as physical. Ancient accounts tell us that enemies often panicked at the sight of a testudo, realizing their best weapons were useless. And when that tortoise reached your walls, the soldiers inside could break formation, storm forward, and climb your defenses. The scutum made this possible. Its size, its curve, its light but sturdy construction, all of it was designed to fit seamlessly into formations like this. The machine of discipline. But let's be clear, formations like these didn't happen automatically. They required training, endurance, and absolute discipline. A shield wall only worked if no one broke rank. Imagine being in the front line, hearing the thunder of cavalry charging at you, or feeling the ground shake beneath a wave of barbarians rushing forward. Every instinct in your body screams at you to run. But a Roman legionary didn't run. He trusted his shield, and more importantly, he trusted the men beside him. This trust turned shields into armor not just for individuals, but for entire armies. The scutum was heavy, about 10 kilograms. Holding it for minutes was fine. Holding it for hours, under attack, under heat, with your arm cramping and your shoulders aching, that was brutal. And yet Romans trained for it. Day after day they drilled in formation, learning to endure together. The shield wasn't just protection, It was a test of willpower. Offensive power of the wall. Here's what makes Roman formations so terrifying: they weren't static. Many cultures used shield walls, but Rome turned theirs into a weapon. The curve of the scutum allowed legionaries to shove forward, using the shield like a battering ram. One soldier pushing was nothing. But an entire line heaving forward in unison became a human bulldozer. This was often the breaking point for enemies. A tribal warrior might fight fiercely in single combat. But when faced with a moving wall that crushed him, disoriented him, and stabbed at him with short swords darting between shields, he broke. The psychological impact can't be overstated. To fight a Roman wall was to fight inevitability itself. Adapting the shield. The scutum also allowed flexibility. Need to absorb a rain of missiles? Form a testudo. Facing cavalry? Plant shields firmly in the ground and create a barrier of iron and wood. Need to advance through tight streets? Stack shields in columns and move as compact units. It was modular warfare, centuries ahead of its time. The scutum was the piece that made the whole puzzle work. Weaknesses in the machine. Of course, no formation was invincible. If a testudo was flanked or surrounded, it became vulnerable. Enemies with fire could wreak havoc as wooden shields ignited. And in muddy terrain, the weight of the shield became a burden. But Rome's answer wasn't redesign. It was discipline. Train harder. Drill longer. Compensate for weakness with sheer cohesion. And it worked, for centuries. A living fortress. To truly appreciate this, imagine the sound of it. Hundreds of shields locking together. The muffled thud of arrows striking wood. The rhythmic chant of soldiers stepping forward. The echo of commanders shouting orders above the chaos. A Roman formation wasn't just a sight to behold. It was an experience that terrified enemies long before swords ever clashed. And remember this: no other piece of Roman equipment symbolized their collective power better than the scutum. The gladius killed, yes. But the shield won battles. Preparing for the impossible. Which brings us back to our central question. If the scutum's greatest strength was in numbers, formations, and discipline, what happens when you pit that against modern firepower? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Formations that terrified barbarians and crushed ancient armies might actually make Romans more vulnerable today. A tight wall of shields, overlapping and moving together, would be the perfect target for automatic rifles, grenades, or artillery. The very thing that made the scutum so effective in its time could become its downfall against modern weapons. But that's the paradox we'll be exploring. In its world, the scutum was the ultimate defensive tool, the heart of Rome's military machine. In ours? It might just be a wooden wall facing a storm it was never meant to endure. That's the power of the Roman formation, turning shields into a living, breathing fortress. A fortress that conquered the ancient world, but may not survive the modern one. We've seen what the Roman scutum could do on its own, and how entire formations turned it into a fortress. But now it's time to look at the other side of this impossible clash: the weapons of today. Weapons that can reach farther, strike faster, and tear through barriers with unimaginable force. To understand whether Roman shields could survive, we first need to understand the modern arsenal: rifles, pistols, and explosives. The rifle, king of the battlefield. If the scutum was the backbone of Roman warfare, the rifle is the backbone of modern combat. Take the M16 or its cousin, the M4 carbine, standard weapons for soldiers around the world. These rifles fire rounds at speeds of nearly 3,000 feet per second. That's faster than sound. Now think about what that means for a shield. A Roman scutum, built of layered wood, leather, and rimmed with iron, was designed to resist the force of a sword strike or the thrust of a spear, forces measured in hundreds of pounds. But a modern rifle round doesn't just strike. It pierces. It carries energy in the thousands of joules, focused into a tiny metal tip designed to cut through steel helmets, sandbags, even light vehicles. One bullet would shatter a scutum. 10 would reduce it to splinters. And remember, rifles don't fire one bullet at a time. They fire in bursts, spraying a wall of lead in seconds. Against that, the shield wall that once looked invincible becomes a line of kindling. The pistol, close-range power. But rifles aren't the only threat. Modern pistols, like the Glock 17 or the classic Colt 1911, fire slower rounds than rifles, but still at speeds and pressures the scutum was never built to withstand. At close range, a pistol round would punch straight through wood and leather, leaving a clean hole. The shield might remain intact, but the soldier behind it? Not so lucky. Unlike arrows, which could be deflected or caught in the shield's curve, bullets create small, devastating wounds. Even one shot could take a legionary out of formation. And in Roman warfare, Breaking formation was often the first step toward defeat. The shotgun, devastation at short distance. Now imagine something even more brutal, the shotgun. At 10 or 20 feet, a shotgun blast doesn't just pierce, it shreds. Pellets scatter in a wide spread, tearing through wood, flesh, and armor alike. A scutum in the path of a shotgun blast would look less like a shield and more like a sieve. Against barbarians armed with swords, the scutum was invincible. Against modern scatter fire, it's just target practice. The machine gun, death in seconds. If rifles and pistols are bad news for the scutum, then the machine gun is its nightmare. A weapon like the M249 or the older M60 can fire hundreds of rounds per minute. Each round carries enough power to punch through wood with ease. Picture it, a Roman testudo formation, shields raised and locked together. In the ancient world, this was unstoppable. But in the modern world, one soldier with a machine gun could mow down an entire formation in seconds. Shields would splinter, men would fall, and the wall of discipline would collapse before it even reached the enemy lines. The truth is stark. Against automatic weapons, the scutum has no chance. Explosives, the end of the shield. But perhaps the greatest threat isn't bullets at all. It's explosives. Hand grenades, claymores, RPGs. Each one represents a level of destruction the Romans could never have imagined. A grenade tossed into a formation would send shards of metal flying in every direction at supersonic speeds. Shields might block some fragments, but the blast force itself would knock soldiers off their feet. Wood and leather can't stop fire and shockwaves. And then there are heavier weapons. Rocket-propelled grenades, anti-tank rounds, mortars, even airstrikes. These aren't just shield killers. They're formation destroyers. The very idea of hiding behind a wall of scuta becomes meaningless in the face of weapons designed to tear apart armored vehicles. Comparing eras. This is where the contrast between Rome and today becomes almost surreal. In their time, Roman shields were cutting-edge technology, as advanced in their purpose as any modern firearm is today. They were efficient, deadly, and symbolic of Rome's dominance. But time changes the battlefield. The scutum was made for arrows, swords, and spears, weapons of line-of-sight combat, where men fought face to face. Modern firearms were built for a world where war happens at distance, where enemies fall before they even see who fired the shot. The gap isn't just in strength. It's in philosophy. The Romans trusted discipline and formations. Modern armies trust speed, firepower, and range. Two completely different ways of thinking about combat, separated by 2,000 years of technological evolution. A harsh reality. So let's be blunt. Against modern rifles, pistols, and explosives, the Roman scutum is hopelessly outmatched. It would splinter, shatter, and burn under firepower it was never designed to face. And yet, there's something worth remembering. For its time, the scutum was just as terrifying to Rome's enemies as a machine gun is to us. A Gaul charging with a long sword felt the same hopelessness that a soldier today would feel under artillery fire. Different tools, same fear. Different weapons, same dominance. The clash ahead. Now that we've seen what modern weapons can do, the stage is set. On one side, the discipline and engineering of Rome. On the other, the raw firepower of today. The question isn't whether the scutum can survive modern weapons. We already know the answer. The real question is, what happens when the two worlds collide on the battlefield? What happens when physics, psychology, and tactics meet head-on? That's where we're headed next, into the direct test, shield versus bullet. This is the moment where imagination collides with reality. The Roman scutum, the shield that conquered an empire, standing face to face with modern bullets, the weapons that dominate today's battlefields. Could there be any contest at all? To find out, we have to break it down, not just historically but scientifically. The first shot. Picture it. A single Roman scutum, propped upright in an open field. Its curved wood gleams in the sunlight, painted red and gold, a metal boss in the center. Across from it stands a soldier with an M16 rifle. The distance, 100 meters. The trigger is pulled. The crack of the rifle echoes, and the bullet streaks across the air at nearly 3,000 feet per second. In less than a heartbeat, it slams into the scutum. What happens? The bullet doesn't bounce. It doesn't embed itself halfway. It punches straight through. Wood splinters. Leather rips. The force is so great that fragments of the shield explode outward from the back. If a soldier had been holding it, the impact would have gone straight into his body. The first test is over in an instant, and the scutum loses. The science of penetration. What? The answer lies in physics. A Roman shield could absorb the impact of a sword strike, maybe a few hundred pounds of force. But a 5.56mm rifle round carries kinetic energy in the range of 1,200 to 1,700 joules. That's the equivalent of dropping a brick from a skyscraper, concentrated into a tip the size of your pinky nail. Even if the scutum had been made of the hardest oak, even if its boss were reinforced with bronze, it would never be enough. Against that kind of power, wood and leather are paper. Arrows versus bullets. For comparison, consider the weapons the scutum was designed to stop. A typical ancient arrow, fired from a strong bow, carried maybe 50 to 100 joules of energy. Enough to pierce flesh, sometimes even bone, but not enough to shred a layered wooden shield. Spears, too, delivered force in single, broad impacts that could be absorbed by the curve of the scutum. But modern bullets? They carry 10 times the energy focused into a much smaller area. That's why arrows often stuck in shields harmlessly, while bullets tear through as if the shield isn't even there. Automatic fire. If one bullet destroys a scutum, imagine a burst of 3, 5, or even 10. Automatic fire doesn't just pierce, it pulverizes. Within seconds, a Roman shield would be reduced to splinters, its paint and leather shredded, its boss twisted or torn off entirely. In the ancient world, soldiers trusted their shields to withstand volleys of arrows. In the modern world, volleys of bullets would tear them apart before they even reached the halfway mark. The testudo under fire. But what about formations? After all, the scutum was never meant to stand alone. What happens if we recreate the legendary Roman testudo, shields locked in front and overhead, a living fortress of wood? At first glance it seems impressive. A wall of overlapping scuta, thicker and denser than any one shield could be. In Rome's time this was invincible. But then the machine gun opens fire. Bullets rake across the wall, piercing shield after shield. One round might stop in the first layer, but the second round finds a seam, the third tears through the wood, the fourth punches into the man behind it. Within seconds dozens of shields are shattered. The testudo collapses, not from fear but from physics. And then imagine a grenade tossed onto the shell. The explosion rips through the formation, blowing shields apart, scattering men in every direction. What was once a fortress is now wreckage. The Romans built the tortoise to resist arrows. But against modern firepower, the tortoise isn't a fortress. It's a coffin. The role of the boss. Could the iron boss in the center help? Some might argue that metal could deflect bullets. But in truth it was never thick enough. Most scuta had bosses made of bronze or thin iron, meant to protect against sword thrusts and to serve as a weapon in close combat. Against a bullet, it might deflect at the right angle, but most of the time, it would simply crumple, leaving the shield even weaker than before. In short, the boss is no defense against gunfire. The soldier's experience. Let's shift perspective. Imagine being a Roman soldier in that moment. You're in formation, shield locked with your comrades. Suddenly there's a deafening crack, louder than thunder. Before you can react, your shield jerks violently in your hand, splinters flying into your face. The man next to you collapses, struck not by a spear you could see, but by an invisible force. Arrows you can brace for. Spears you can dodge. But bullets? They arrive faster than your mind can register. You don't even see the enemy, only smoke, sound, and death. The psychological impact alone would shatter even the toughest legionary discipline. Could anything save them? Is there any chance a Roman shield could survive modern weapons? Perhaps only under specific conditions. At extreme distances, where bullets lose speed and power, a scutum might slow a round or stop fragments. Against ricochets, splinters, or low-caliber pistols, maybe the shield provides some protection. But in a true battlefield scenario, rifles, machine guns, grenades, there is no contest. The scutum simply wasn't built for that world. A sobering reality. And yet this isn't just about physics. It's about perspective. For us, watching a scutum fall apart under gunfire is expected. Of course, an ancient shield can't survive modern weapons. But remember, in their world, the scutum was just as terrifyingly effective as an assault rifle is today. It was the difference between life and death, victory and defeat. The fact that we're even asking this question is a testament to how legendary the Roman shield truly was. From wood to Kevlar. Today's soldiers carry ballistic shields made of Kevlar, ceramics, and advanced composites. Materials that can stop bullets, sometimes even rifle rounds. In many ways, these are the spiritual descendants of the scutum. The purpose hasn't changed: protection, unity, survival. Only the technology has evolved. The Roman scutum could not survive the bullet. But its legacy lives on every time a modern soldier crouches behind a riot shield or advances with a ballistic plate. The verdict of the clash. So, when the bullet meets the shield, the result is absolute. The scutum shatters. The bullet wins. But this clash tells us something deeper. Technology evolves, but the need for protection never changes. Rome built shields for its enemies. We build ours for ours. And 2,000 years from now, someone may look back at our weapons the same way we look back at Rome's, powerful once but hopeless against the future. That's the truth of shield versus bullet. Not just destruction but the story of how war itself has evolved. So far we've compared shields to bullets, wood to steel, formations to gunfire. And the results have been as expected. The scutum was never meant to withstand modern weapons. But the story doesn't end there. Because war is never just about equipment. It's about the minds of the soldiers, the tactics they use, and the endurance they can summon when the world collapses around them. This is where the clash between Romans and modern warfare becomes even more fascinating, and even more tragic. The Roman mindset. Roman soldiers were trained to endure pain, exhaustion, and fear in ways that are hard to imagine today. They marched 20 miles a day with packs weighing 30 kilos or more. They built camps every night, digging ditches and raising palisades before they even slept. And then they fought brutal battles where survival often came down to the strength of the formation. Discipline was absolute. A Roman didn't break rank. He didn't run. Because if he did, punishment could be worse than death. Cowards were beaten, disgraced, sometimes executed. The legion's strength was the group, and no individual was above it. That mindset created warriors who believed in inevitability. The shield wall always advanced. The testudo always reached its target. Victory was not a possibility, it was destiny. But destiny had never heard the crack of a rifle. The psychological shock of gunfire. Now imagine taking that soldier, disciplined, fearless, unstoppable, and putting him on a modern battlefield. The first thing he hears is the deafening roar of gunfire. Not the clash of swords, not the thud of arrows, but a sound so loud and sharp it feels like the air itself is tearing apart. Then men beside him fall, not from visible strikes, but from invisible holes punched into their bodies. Shields splinter in their hands before they even see the enemy. This is not just physical destruction. It's psychological collapse. Romans were trained to expect pain. But pain you can see, pain you can fight. A sword you can parry. A spear you can dodge. How do you fight a weapon that kills before you even see it? For the first time, discipline falters. The line wavers. And in Roman warfare, once the line wavers, the battle is already lost. Modern tactics versus ancient formations. Tactics reveal the gap even more clearly. Roman tactics were designed for close combat. The shield wall, the testudo, the slow, steady advance. All worked brilliantly against enemies who fought with spears, swords, and bows. They depended on cohesion and numbers. Modern tactics are the opposite. Fire and maneuver. Speed. Suppression. Small squads spread out, covering each other with rifles and grenades, moving from cover to cover. Now imagine those two worlds colliding. A Roman legion packs tight, shields interlocked, moving forward in a massive block. For them, that density is safety. For modern soldiers, it's the perfect target. A burst of machine gun fire would cut through the formation like a scythe through wheat. A single grenade could wipe out 10 men at once. Even if the Romans reached close range, they would still struggle. A Roman gladius is deadly in tight combat, but only if you can get close enough to use it. Modern soldiers wouldn't let them. Pistols, shotguns, even knives are faster and more lethal than ancient blades in one-on-one fights. The Roman formation, once the most advanced tactical machine on earth, becomes a liability. Endurance and survival. Still, there's one area where Romans shine: endurance. Modern soldiers are highly trained, but their training is limited by technology. Vehicles carry loads. Radios and satellites provide coordination. Supplies are delivered by trucks or aircraft. Remove those and the modern soldier struggles. Romans, by contrast, carried their world on their backs. They built roads, bridges, camps, all by hand. Their endurance was almost superhuman by today's standards. So if the clash dragged into a war of attrition, if bullets and bombs somehow vanished, Rome's soldiers might outlast their modern opponents in sheer grit. They could march longer, fight dirtier, survive on less food, and endure harsher conditions. In that sense, the legionary's body was his greatest weapon. But again, endurance means little when firepower ends battles in seconds. Fear and morale. The final factor is fear. In Rome's time, fear was managed through ritual, discipline, and spectacle. Soldiers fought under the eagle standard, believing the gods themselves watched over them. They saw comrades punished for cowardice, rewarded for bravery. Their fear was molded into unity. On a modern battlefield, that system collapses. The enemy is unseen. Death comes at random. The shield doesn't protect. The gods don't intervene. Even the strongest Roman discipline would crumble under the weight of modern fear. And once fear spreads, the legion shatters. The human tragedy. This is where the true tragedy of the clash lies. The scutum may splinter, but the Roman soldier's spirit breaks first. Not because he is weak, but because he is fighting an enemy 2,000 years ahead of his world. It's not a fair fight. It never could be. Lessons from the clash. But what do we learn from this? That the Romans were fools? That their shields were worthless? Not at all. We learn that war is always about context. The scutum was perfect for its battlefield, just as Kevlar and rifles are perfect for ours. Swap them and both fail. A modern soldier stripped of his rifle and armor, forced to fight with a wooden shield and short sword, would likely fare no better than a Roman against bullets. The tools shape the tactics shape the psychology, and the psychology shapes the soldier. Change the tools and everything else collapses. A clash of spirits. So in the end, the clash isn't just about shields and bullets. It's about two different visions of war. Rome's vision, unity, endurance, inevitability. Our vision, speed, firepower, technology. Both were unstoppable in their time. Both made their enemies tremble. And both remind us that in war, the human spirit is as important as the weapon in your hand. The Roman soldier, holding his scutum, would fight with courage even as bullets tore through him. And that courage, that refusal to break until the end, is why Rome conquered the world. But courage alone cannot stop lead, setting the stage for the verdict. And so, as the dust settles, we come to the final question. What is the verdict of this impossible clash? Could the Roman shield, and the men who carried it, stand against modern firepower? Or is this the clearest example yet of how history's greatest weapons become relics in the face of time? That's what we'll answer in the final chapter. We've walked through centuries in a single story, from the Roman shield wall to the rattle of modern gunfire. We've seen wood splinter, bullets pierce, and formations collapse under firepower that Rome could never have imagined. But now comes the ultimate question. If time bent and a Roman legion marched onto a modern battlefield, what would truly happen? A clash of eras. On one side, the Roman legionary. Bronze helmet gleaming in the sun, scutum held high, gladius at the ready. He advances shoulder to shoulder with his brothers, the ground trembling beneath thousands of disciplined feet. On the other, a modern infantry squad. Lightweight armor, rifles locked and loaded, radios buzzing with coordination. They crouch behind cover, unseen, their weapons ready to unleash firepower that can rip through steel in an instant. At first glance, it feels like a fair fight. Courage versus technology. Endurance versus precision. Ancient pride against modern science. But the balance tips almost immediately. The brutal reality. The moment contact is made, the scutum is no longer a shield. It is a target. Bullets tear through its wooden frame as if it were paper. Arrows once bounced from its curve. Now rounds punch holes clean through. The Roman testudo, once an unstoppable war machine, becomes a coffin. Packed tight, the soldiers are slaughtered in waves. A single burst of machine gun fire fells dozens. A grenade erases an entire section. And as bodies fall, fear spreads. Not fear of death, Romans knew death well, but fear of the unknown. They cannot see their killers. They cannot fight back. Their discipline, once their greatest strength, becomes their downfall, trapping them in place as technology tears them apart. The verdict seems clear. Modern firepower wins. The scutum fails. Rome falls again. But victory is more than survival. And yet, perhaps the story isn't so simple. Because when we call this a clash, we imagine it only in terms of survival. Who lives, who dies, who wins the ground. But war, history, and humanity are never only about killing. They're also about resilience, spirit, the ability to inspire. And here the Romans still have something to teach us. The power of design. Consider the scutum itself. A shield of wood and leather reinforced with metal. It was designed not just for defense but for unity. It turned thousands of individuals into one body, one unstoppable mass. It symbolized Rome's belief that strength came not from the man, but from the legion. Even if bullets destroy it, the scutum remains a marvel of engineering. A reminder that tools are only as great as the purpose they serve. In its time, it was as effective as Kevlar is today. That is victory in its own right. The power of endurance. Then there's the Roman soldier. Yes, he would fall under gunfire. But before that, he would march farther, endure longer, and fight harder than most modern soldiers could imagine. With nothing but bread, water, and iron discipline, he could build fortifications overnight, then fight all day. His endurance was not measured in seconds on the battlefield, but in decades of conquest. Rome expanded not because of one shield, but because of millions of soldiers who refused to stop. That kind of endurance is timeless. The power of spirit. Finally, there is spirit. The Roman soldier believed he was part of something eternal. The eagle standard, the glory of Rome, the idea that his name and his sacrifice would live forever. That spirit cannot be shot down by bullets. And while it wouldn't save him from death in a modern firefight, it would ensure that he died standing, shield raised, never turning his back. And perhaps that is the most important victory of all. Lessons across time. So, what does this impossible clash truly reveal? It reveals that weapons shape war, but war is never only about weapons. The scutum cannot stand against a rifle. But it doesn't have to. It stood against spears, arrows, and swords for centuries, and in doing so, it built an empire that shaped the world we live in today. It reveals that context is everything. Technology makes us powerful, but only in the age that supports it. Strip a modern soldier of his weapons and place him in Rome, and he would likely fall to the same shields that fail him today. And it reveals that, across all ages, the human spirit, the courage to stand, the will to endure, the belief in something greater than oneself, is what truly defines a soldier. The final verdict. So here's the verdict. In raw combat, the Roman scutum falls before modern firepower. No shield of wood and leather can stand against bullets, bombs, and the fury of 21st century war. But in another sense, the scutum endures. It endures as a symbol of unity, of discipline, of the human ability to adapt to the needs of the age. It endures as a reminder that even the mightiest weapons of today will one day be relics, just as vulnerable to time as the Roman shield. The Romans would lose the battle. But the lessons they left us? Those remain victories carved into history forever. Closing reflection. So perhaps the question was never really, can Roman shields stop bullets? Perhaps the real question is, what do Roman shields teach us about the soldiers who carried them and the world they built? And the answer is this: they teach us that every age creates its own armor, its own weapons, its own courage. And when the clash comes, whether by sword, shield, or bullet, it is the spirit behind the weapon that endures longest of all. Rome's shields cannot withstand bullets. But Rome's legacy? That will outlast them both.